Can you elaborate on the role of what is private intelligence and what's the role of private intelligence in the scope of all the intelligence that is gathered and used in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that so few people know about, and it became a more mainstream topic with the Trump administration because Trump made it no secret that he was going to hire private intelligence organizations to run his intelligence operations and fund them. So that really brought it to the mainstream. But going all the way back to 9/11, going all the way back to 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, there was a commission that was formed to determine the reasons that 9/11 happened. And among the lists that they determined, of course, they found out that the intelligence community wasn't coordinating well with each other. There were fiefdoms and there was infighting and there wasn't good intel sharing. But more than that, they identified that we were operating uh, at Cold War levels, even though we were living in a time when terrorism was the new biggest threat to national security. So the big recommendation coming out of the 9/11 Commission was that the intelligence organizations, the intelligence community, significantly increase the presence of intelligence operators overseas and in terms of analytical capacity here in the United States. When they made that decision, it completely destroyed, it totally was incongruent with the existing hiring process because the existing hiring process for CIA or NSA is a 6 to 9 month process. The only way they could plus up their sizes fast enough was to bypass their own hiring and instead go direct to private organizations. So naturally, the government contracted with the companies that they already had secure contracts with: Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, CACI, you name it. And then over time, from 2001 to now, or I guess that started really in 2004 when they started significantly increasing the presence of private intelligence officers. From then until now, it's become a budgetary thing. It's become a continuity of operations thing. And now the reason Northern Virginia has become one of the wealthiest zip codes in America is because of the incredible concentration of private intelligence that is supporting CIA, NSA, DIA, FBI, and all the slew of IC partners.
By the way, does Palantir play a role in this?
Palantir is one of those organizations that was trying to pitch their product to an intelligence community because it's a fantastic product on paper. But the challenge was the proprietary services, the proprietary systems that we used in CIA prior to Palantir continued to outperform Palantir. So just like any other business decision, if you've got homegrown systems that outperform external systems, then it's not worth it to share the internal information.
Got it. So what the close connection between Peter Thiel and Donald Trump, did that have a role to play in Donald Trump's leveraging of private intelligence, or is that completely disjoint?
I think that they're related, but only circumstantially. Because remember, Donald Trump wasn't really investing in CIA. So the last thing he wanted to do was spend his network, WASTA. WASTA is a term that we call influence. It's an Arabic term for influence. Trump didn't want to use his WASTA putting Thiel into CIA, only to lose Thiel's contract as soon as Trump left office. So instead, it was more valuable to put Peter Thiel's tool to use in private intelligence. And then, of course, I think he nominated Peter Thiel to be his Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. At some point in time, he tried to presidentially appoint Peter Thiel into a position of government authority.
What do you think of figures like Peter Thiel? Do they wield, and I'm sure there's figures of similar scale and reach and power in private intelligence. What do you think about their role and power in this whole, without public accountability?
Yes.
That you would think directors of CIA perhaps have?
So this is where private intelligence has both a strength and a weakness. The ultimate law overriding that's overseeing private intelligence is not government legislation. It's the law of economics. If they produce a superior product, then they will have a buyer. If they do not produce a superior product, they will not have a buyer. And that's a very simple business principle. Whereas in the current national security infrastructure, you can create a crap product, but the taxpayer dollars are always going to be spent. So it's really thrown things for a loop, especially during the Trump administration. And this is one of the things that I will always say I liked about the Trump administration. It put a big blazing bright light on all of the flaws within our system. One of those flaws being this executive power over the intelligence organizations and the lack of accountability for intelligence organizations to produce a superior product. When that light got shone down, that's when you also saw Trump start to go after, if you remember, there was a period where he was taking security clearances away from retiring officers. That became a big, hot issue. That became something that people were very opposed to when they didn't realize that process of taking security clearances away, that incentivized seasoned senior officers to stay in service. Because with private intelligence paying a premium during the Trump administration, because Trump was paying a premium to the private intelligence world, when senior officers found that it was more profitable to retire early, keep their clearance, and go work for Raytheon, Trump saw that as bypassing service to the American people. You've made a career in CIA, you've made a career in NSA, you should stay there. If you leave, you lose your clearance because you no longer have a need to know. He upset the apple cart with that. And unfortunately, the narrative that came out in many ways was a negative narrative against Trump, when in fact, he was actually doing quite a service to the American people, trying to take away the incentive of senior officials leaving their service in order to just profiteer in the private intelligence world.
So in that way, he was kind of supporting the CIA in making sure that competent people and experienced people stay and are incentivized to stay there.
Correct. I think that there was definitely he understood incentives. I mean, Donald Trump understands incentives. So he was trying to incentivize them to stay, but I think he was also playing a safety card because he didn't want former CIA officials who were not listening to him to then move into private intel organizations that he may be hiring, only to then have them undermine him from both sides of the coin. So there was a little bit of offensive calculation in there as well.
But do the dynamics and the incentives of economics that you referred to that the private intelligence operates under, is that more or less ethical than the forces that maybe government agencies operate under? Like, what's your intuition? Is capitalism lead? So you mentioned it leads to maximizations of efficiency and performance, but is that correlated with ethical behavior when we're talking about such hairy activities like collection of intelligence?
The question of ethics is a great question. So let me start this whole thing out by saying CIA hires people on a spectrum of our ability to be morally flexible, ethically flexible. All people at their heart are ethically flexible. I would never punch somebody in the face, right? Some people out there would say, I would never hurt another human being. But as soon as a human being posed a direct threat to their daughter or their son or their mother, now all of a sudden they're going to change their ethical stance in self-defense, right? But at the end of the day, it's still hurting another person. So what CIA looks for is people who are able to swing across that spectrum for lesser offenses, right? More flexibility. I do not believe that private intelligence and the laws of economics lend themselves to increased ethics or increased ethical behavior in the short term. But what ends up happening is that in the long term, in order to scale economic benefits, you are forced to act within norms of your customer base. So as the norms of that customer base dictate certain requirements, the company has to adapt to those requirements in order to continue to scale. So if a company tries to ostracize LGBTQ, or if they try to ostracize men or ostracize women, they're limiting their ability to grow economically. They have to adapt to whatever is the prevailing ethical requirement of their customer base.
That's such an interesting question because you look at big pharma and pharmaceutical companies, and they have a quite a poor reputation in the public eye,
Yep.
and some of it, maybe much of it, is deserved, at least historically speaking. And so you start to wonder, well, can intelligence agencies use some of the same technique to manipulate the public, like what they believe about those agencies, in order to maximize profit as well? Sort of finding shortcuts or unethical paths that allow you to not be ultimately
Responsible.
responsible to the customer.
Absolutely. And I would go a step further to say that the covert nature of intelligence operations is really attractive when it comes to the private sector because now they have all the same money with none of the oversight, and all they have to do is deliver. So without the oversight, what's holding you back? And in a lot of for anybody who's ever run a business, anybody who's ever started a startup or tried to make something succeed, we all know that there come those times where you have to skirt the boundaries of propriety or morality or commitments or promises to other people, because at the end of the day, if your business fails, it's on you. So if you promise to deliver something to a client, you've got to deliver it to the client, even if that means you stay up late or if you lie on your taxes, whatever it might be. There's a certain level of do or die.
Yeah, I personally have a sort of optimistic view that ultimately the best way is to stay within ethical bounds, kind of like what you suggested. If you want to be a company that's extremely successful, is win with competence, not with cheating, because cheating won't, I believe, win in the long term. But in terms of being publicly responsible to your decisions, I mean, I've already been supposed to talk to Peter Thiel twice on this podcast, and it's just been complicated. If I were to put myself into his shoes, why do podcasts? The risk is too high to be a public person at all, and so I totally understand that. At the same time, I think if you're doing things by the book and you're the best in the world at your job, then you have nothing to worry about. And you can advertise that, and you help recruit. I mean, that's the work of capitalism. Is you want to advertise that this is the place where the best people in the world at this thing work.
True. I think that your point of view is accurate. I would also say that there the complexities of what makes somebody make a decision can only really be properly calculated with a baseline. So because there is no baseline that you or I have on Peter Thiel, it's difficult to really ascertain why he does or doesn't accept invites or why he does or doesn't appear.